My sister-in-law falsely accused me of assault and ruined my life. 3 years later, her affair with her dad's friend exposed everything. I'm Ryan, a 32-year-old male, and I grew up in a small town in Kentucky. Life was pretty typical: small community, high school football games on Fridays, and everyone knew everyone. I have an older brother, Ethan, who is 35. Despite the age gap, we were really close growing up. Ethan was the kind of guy everyone looked up to. He was the star of our high school soccer team, the guy who could charm anyone, and the golden child in our family. I wasn't as outgoing. I was more into video games and art, and I struggled a lot with confidence, especially during middle school. Ethan was always there for me, though. He taught me how to talk to girls, well, tried to, and gave me pep talks when I felt like I didn't fit in. He made sure I never got bullied, and even let me tag along when he hung out with his friends. So, yeah, I idolized him. After high school, we went our separate ways. Ethan went into sales, climbing the ladder fast, and I became a graphic designer. But still, we made it a point to stay close. We'd talk every week, and when we visited our parents' home, it was like nothing had changed. A few years ago, Ethan met Julia at a work conference in Chicago. She was a freelance consultant, smart, confident, and, according to Ethan, absolutely stunning. He fell head over heels. I didn't meet her until they'd been dating for a few months, and honestly, from the start, something about her didn't sit right with me. The first time I met Julia was at a family barbecue. Ethan brought her, and everyone seemed impressed. Julia was super chatty, cracking jokes, and blending in easily. But then she started making some questionable comments. At one point, she pointed out one of Ethan's friends and said, "Wow, that guy is a total DILF. Don't let him near your single coworkers, Ethan." I remember glancing at Ethan, expecting him to be annoyed or at least embarrassed, but he just laughed it off. Later, she made a joke about how if Ethan ever got boring, she'd just trade up. I tried brushing it off, thinking maybe she's just joking around. But it didn't sit right with me. After the barbecue, I told Ethan I thought Julia's comments were kind of inappropriate. He waved it off, saying, "That's just how she is. She's confident and funny. You're overthinking it, man." So I dropped it. I didn't want to start any drama. As their relationship got more serious, Julia's behavior became harder to ignore. They got engaged a year later, and by then she was a constant presence at family gatherings. She had this way of being the center of attention, loud, opinionated, and always cracking jokes. Sometimes, it felt like she was trying too hard, but I kept my mouth shut. It wasn't until their wedding that things really started bothering me. During the rehearsal dinner, Julia made a joke about one of my friends, Eric, who was helping out with the event. She loudly commented, "Eric's got that rugged lumberjack thing going on. If I weren't taken, I'd be sliding into his DMs right now." I could see Ethan shift uncomfortably, but he still didn't say anything. Afterward, Sarah, my fiancée, and I talked about it, and she admitted she didn't like Julia either. "She's a lot," Sarah said, "and not in a good way." At their wedding reception, Julia was even more over the top. She made a toast where she joked about how Ethan won her over with his wallet and not his dancing. Everyone laughed, but I couldn't help but cringe. Who says that on their wedding day? By this point, I was pretty much done trying to give her the benefit of the doubt. Ethan was happy though, and I didn't want to rock the boat. But things got worse after they got married. Julia started making bolder comments, especially about me and Sarah. One time, we were at a family gathering, and Julia turned to Sarah and asked, "How did you end up with Ryan? You seem like the kind of girl who'd go for someone who's, the life of the party." Sarah handled it gracefully, just laughing it off, but I could tell she was annoyed. Another time, Julia made a crack about my job, saying, "Must be nice to doodle for a living. I should have gone into graphic design instead of consulting." Ethan laughed nervously, and I felt my blood boiling, but I bit my tongue. The final straw for me was at our parents' anniversary party. Julia walked in wearing a dress that was, let's just say, way too revealing for a family event. She spent the entire night making flirty comments to random people, including some of Ethan's coworkers who were there. At one point, she made a joke about how one of the older men reminded her of a handsome version of her dad. When I brought this up to Ethan later, he snapped at me, "Why do you always have something negative to say about Julia? She's my wife now, Ryan. You need to accept that." I realized then that I couldn't talk to him about her anymore. He was completely blinded by her. And no matter how inappropriate her behavior was, he wasn't going to see it. I wish I had been more direct with him, or tried harder to get him to see what was going on, but at the time, I figured it was his life. As long as Julia wasn't directly hurting me, it wasn't my place to interfere. Of course, I didn't know how bad things were going to get. Julia wasn't just annoying or inappropriate, she was manipulative, and she knew exactly how to push people's buttons. Ethan and Julia had been married for about 6 months when Julia started randomly showing up at my apartment. At first, I thought it was just her being friendly. After all the mean comments she used to throw about me, maybe Ethan talked to her. But looking back now, it was super weird. The first time she came over, Sarah wasn't home. I was in the middle of working on a freelance project when Julia knocked on my door. She said she'd locked herself out of her car and was waiting for a locksmith. I didn't think much of it and let her in, assuming she'd wait a few minutes and then leave once the locksmith arrived. Instead, she stayed for almost an hour, chatting about random stuff, her work, Ethan, their dog, whatever popped into her head. At one point, she commented on how cozy my apartment was, and said it felt like a safe space. I wasn't sure what to say to that, so I just kind of nodded and mumbled something about Sarah decorating the place. The locksmith finally called her back, and she left. I didn't mention it to Ethan because honestly, I thought it was just a one-off, but then it happened again a week later. She showed up with this random thank you basket for Sarah and me. It was full of fancy snacks, cheese, crackers, chocolates. She said it was for always being so supportive of her and Ethan. I thought it was a nice gesture, but it felt a little over the top. She ended up staying way longer than I was comfortable with. Sarah wasn't home again, so it was just me and Julia. She sat on the couch, chatting about how stressful her job was, and how hard it was adjusting to married life. I tried to steer the conversation toward Ethan, like, well, I'm sure Ethan helps you out, but she just kind of laughed and said, "Oh, you know how he is." After she left, I told Sarah about it, and she raised an eyebrow. "That's odd," she said. "Why is she coming over when I'm not here?" "I don't know," I replied, "but it's starting to feel weird." We agreed that if Julia showed up again, I'd find a way to cut the visit short. The turning point was one rainy evening. It was one of those dreary days where you just want to stay in and relax. Sarah was out running errands, and I was catching up on a Netflix series when Julia knocked on my door. She was soaking wet, holding an umbrella that was clearly not doing its job. She said she and Ethan had a huge fight about their finances, and that she needed someone to talk to. I hesitated but figured it would be rude to turn her away, especially since she looked so upset. I let her in and made her a cup of tea while she went on about how Ethan didn't understand her stress, and how he was being too controlling about money. She sat on the couch, looking all pitiful, and I felt awkward as hell. Then she started making comments that crossed the line. She leaned back and said, "Your place is so relaxing compared to my chaotic house. It feels good to just breathe here." I didn't know what to say, so I just muttered, thanks." She kept going, saying things like, "You're such a good listener. Ethan could learn a thing or two from you." She kept trying to get closer to me, making me uncomfortable. At that point, I stood up and moved to the chair across the room, trying to put some distance between us. I told her, "Look, I'm sure you and Ethan can work things out. He's a good guy." She nodded, but I could tell she wasn't really listening. Thankfully, Ethan showed up about 20 minutes later. As soon as he walked in, Julia's entire vibe changed. She went from being teary and dramatic to cheerful and casual, like nothing had happened. She even laughed and said, "Oh, I was just telling Ryan about how stressed I've been lately." Ethan didn't seem suspicious, and they left shortly after. I thought that was the end of it, but then, about a week later, Ethan showed up at my apartment, and he wasn't happy. He barged in, yelling about how Julia had told him I'd made a pass at her that night. She said I tried to kiss her and that she barely got away before Ethan arrived. I was completely blindsided. "Are you serious right now?" I asked. "That's not what happened at all." Ethan didn't want to hear it. He accused me of trying to ruin his marriage and called me a jealous loser who couldn't stand to see him happy. I tried to explain what really happened, but he wasn't listening. He got in my face, and before I knew it, he shoved me hard enough that I stumbled back. Sarah walked in right at that moment and immediately stepped between us, yelling at Ethan to back off. After Ethan stormed out, Sarah and I sat down, trying to process what just happened. I was furious, not just at Ethan for believing Julia's lies, but at Julia for even making the accusation in the first place. The next day my parents called. Somehow Julia and Ethan had already gotten to them. My mom started with, "Ryan, we need to talk about what happened with Julia. She told us everything." I tried to explain my side, but she cut me off, saying, "You always misunderstood her friendliness. Julia's always been such a sweet girl, and this time, you've gone too far." My dad chimed in, accusing me of being jealous of Ethan's perfect life and saying I needed to grow up. That conversation was the nail in the coffin. My parents weren't even interested in hearing my side. They just automatically sided with Ethan and Julia. Sarah was the only one who truly had my back. She told me, "We're not dealing with this nonsense anymore. Let them believe what they want. You and I know the truth, and that's what matters." She was right, but it didn't make it hurt any less. My own family had turned on me over something that never even happened. It felt like everything I'd built with Ethan over the years, our bond, our trust, was completely destroyed. At that moment, I decided I was done trying to prove myself to people who didn't want to believe me. If they wanted to side with Julia, that was on them. Life was weird for a while. Sarah and I didn't run away, like Ethan and my parents tried to spin it. We just wanted a fresh start. We had already been thinking about moving to Arizona for better job opportunities and warmer weather, so when everything with my family hit the fan, it felt like the right time to go. We packed up, found a cozy apartment in Phoenix, and threw ourselves into work and building a new life. Sarah got a great gig as a project manager, and I landed a role with a design firm that actually valued creativity. For the first time in months, life felt normal again. It wasn't perfect though. I still thought about what happened back home more than I'd like to admit. Ethan and I hadn't spoken since that blow-up at my apartment, and my parents had made it clear they weren't interested in hearing my side of things. They were all in with Julia's version of events. I tried to focus on the positives. Sarah and I loved exploring the area, weekend hikes, trying every taco spot we could find, and soaking up the sunshine. It felt good to have a little bubble of peace far away from the drama. Then, 3 years later, on one random Tuesday night, I got a direct message on Instagram that flipped everything upside down. The message was from a woman named Hannah. I didn't recognize her at first, but she introduced herself as someone who used to be friends with Julia. Apparently, Hannah had been on Julia's private Instagram account, the one Julia used to vent and post stuff she didn't want most people to see. Hannah said she'd been keeping tabs on the whole situation because she felt guilty about staying quiet when Julia falsely accused me. I was skeptical at first. Why would this random woman reach out now? But then she sent me screenshots, and holy crap, they were bad. According to Hannah, Julia had done this kind of thing before, twice actually. The first time was in college. She accused a guy in her dorm of making inappropriate advances toward her at a party. There was an investigation, and even though the guy was cleared, his reputation was trashed. People stopped hanging out with him, and he eventually transferred schools. The second time was at her old job. Julia accused one of her coworkers of harassment. Human resources got involved, but the guy was cleared after they reviewed emails and camera footage. Still, he quit not long after because of all the whispers and awkwardness in the office. The worst part? Hannah sent me screenshots from Julia's private account that were dated around the time of her accusation against me. In one post, Julia joked about how easy it is to make people believe what you want if you cry hard enough. In another, she referred to Ethan as her boring ATM, and said she was counting down the days until I don't have to deal with this crap anymore. My stomach dropped. I knew Ethan had no idea about any of this. Sarah sat next to me while I read through the messages and looked at the screenshots. "You need to save all of this," she said, grabbing my laptop so we could back everything up. Part of me wanted to just delete the direct message and move on. I didn't want to get dragged back into the chaos. But another part of me felt like I needed to know the full story. So, I kept talking to Hannah. She told me Julia had started distancing herself from their friend group about a year before her wedding. She got really weird, Hannah said, like she didn't want anyone getting too close or knowing too much about her life. When I asked why Hannah hadn't come forward sooner, she admitted she was scared. Julia was manipulative and had a way of turning people against each other. She'd find a way to make me look like the bad guy, Hannah said. But when I saw what she did to you, I couldn't stay quiet anymore. Hearing all this was a lot. I felt angry, vindicated, and sick all at the same time. For months, I'd been painted as the bad guy. someone who would betray his own brother, while Julia was out here bragging about manipulating everyone. Sarah was my rock through all of this. She kept reminding me that none of this was my fault and that I didn't owe anyone an explanation or apology. But I couldn't stop thinking about Ethan. How could he be so blind? Julia wasn't just toxic, she was dangerous. She'd lied to him, manipulated him, and humiliated him behind his back. I felt like I had some closure. Julia's lies had caused so much damage, but now I had proof that I wasn't the crazy one. And yet, there was a nagging feeling in the back of my mind. If Julia had a history of doing this to other people, what was stopping her from doing it again? Or worse, what if she turned her manipulations on Ethan in an even more destructive way? So here's where everything really started to fall apart for Julia. I honestly didn't think things could get messier. But man, was I wrong. After Hannah sent me all those screenshots from Julia's private account, I sat on them for a bit. I wasn't sure what to do with the information. Sarah and I agreed that reaching out to Ethan might not be the best move. He had made it clear where his loyalty was, and I wasn't ready to deal with more of his nonsense. But as it turns out, I didn't have to say anything. Ethan found out the hard way. Apparently, Julia had gotten too comfortable with her little double life. According to Hannah, one night while Julia was showering, Ethan noticed her phone buzzing non-stop on the kitchen counter. Out of curiosity, or maybe suspicion, he checked it. What he found wasn't just bad, it was nuclear. There were explicit texts, hotel confirmations, and even photos between Julia and an older guy. And when I say older, I mean way older. This guy wasn't just her sugar daddy, he was her dad's longtime business associate, someone Ethan had probably shaken hands with at family events. The messages made it crystal clear what was going on. They were meeting up during her work trips and spending weekends together at fancy resorts. She even bragged in one of the texts about how easy it was to get Ethan to believe her lies. When Julia got out of the shower, Ethan confronted her immediately. From what I've heard, it wasn't pretty. Ethan demanded an explanation, and Julia, being Julia, tried to spin it. She told him the messages were just fantasy roleplay and that it wasn't what it looked like. Ethan didn't buy it, so then she switched tactics. She accused him of being neglectful, saying he worked too much, didn't pay enough attention to her, and basically drove her to seek comfort elsewhere. Classic deflection. But Ethan wasn't having it. He kicked her out that night. Julia tried to argue, but Ethan packed her bags and told her to leave. Their marriage unraveled fast after that. Ethan told our parents what had happened, but shockingly, they still tried to defend Julia. My mom said, "Marriage is hard, Ethan. Maybe you should go to counseling." Yeah, because couples counseling totally fixes infidelity and secret sugar daddy situations. But here's where karma finally caught up with her. Hannah wasn't the only one who knew about Julia's sugar daddy. Apparently the guy's wife had been suspicious for a while. She started digging and eventually found proof of the affair, texts, emails, everything, and she didn't hold back. The wife made everything public. She shared the screenshots with their entire social circle, which included a lot of people in their business community. At this point, Julia's life was in complete free fall, and things just kept getting worse for her. The first major blow was to her career. Julia had built this image of herself as a successful, polished consultant, someone who could land clients and close deals like a pro. But once her affair became public knowledge, and with her name tied to a messy divorce, her professional network wanted nothing to do with her. Hannah, who was still feeding me updates, told me that several companies she had worked with started quietly blacklisting her. It wasn't just because of the affair. People were finding out about her history of manipulation, her false accusations, and the general chaos she left in her wake. Nobody wanted to risk their reputation by associating with her. It was like a domino effect. Clients dropped her, contracts weren't renewed, and even smaller firms stopped returning her calls. The consulting world is small, and word travels fast. Julia's name had become toxic. On top of that, her friends started pulling away. A lot of the people who had initially taken her side during the drama with me and Ethan started to see her for who she really was. Some of them had their own stories about Julia stirring up trouble or making inappropriate comments. And once they realized this wasn't just a one-time thing, they cut ties. Even her family had enough. From what I heard, her dad was furious about the affair. Not just because it was with one of his business associates, but because it dragged their family name into the mud. Julia had always been his golden child, the one he bragged about at parties and family gatherings. Now, she was an embarrassment. He disowned her completely. Julia's mom was apparently more conflicted about it, but she eventually followed suit. They didn't want anything to do with her. Now you'd think at this point Julia might step back and reevaluate her life choices. But nope. Instead, she decided to double down on playing the victim. She started a GoFundMe titled something like "Help a Domestic Abuse Survivor Rebuild Her Life." The description was full of vague accusations about Ethan being controlling and emotionally abusive. She even mentioned estranged family members, that'd be me, who abandoned her in her time of need. For a brief moment, it seemed like she might actually get away with it. A few people donated, probably out of pity or because they didn't know the full story. But then the internet did what the internet does best. People started sharing screenshots of her messages, posts from her private account, and all the evidence of her lies. It didn't take long for the comments on her GoFundMe page to turn brutal, domestic abuse survivor, more like a serial liar. Funny how she's the victim in every story. Starting to think the common denominator is you, Julia. Y'all better Google her name before donating. She's not who she says she is. The backlash was intense. Within a week, Julia took the page down, but the damage was done. Any remaining credibility she had was gone. Then she disappeared from social media altogether. She deleted her Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn accounts. No more selfies in luxury hotels, no more motivational quotes about living your best life. It was like she wanted to erase herself from the internet. For a while, I didn't hear anything about her. Sarah and I were focused on our own lives, work, weekend trips, and just enjoying the peace and quiet. But then Hannah reached out again with one last update. Apparently, Julia had moved to a small town in Nevada, completely off the radar. She was working as a waitress at some diner, far from the life of designer bags and fancy parties she used to flaunt. Hannah even sent me a picture someone had taken of her at the diner. She looked different, tired, like life had knocked her down a few pegs. She was wearing a plain uniform, her hair pulled back in a way that felt practical, not stylish. I didn't feel sorry for her. Julia had brought this on herself, but I couldn't help but think about how far she'd fallen. This was someone who had spent years building a facade, only to have it crumble in the most spectacular way. Julia's world completely collapsed. She'd lost her career, her friends, her family, and her shiny image. All that was left was the person underneath, and it turns out there wasn't much there. I finally felt like I could move forward, but of course, life wasn't going to make it that easy. You'd think after Julia torched her reputation and Ethan saw her for what she was, things would settle down. Nope. Instead, the drama just shifted direction. It started with my parents. They'd been radio silent for a while after Ethan kicked Julia out and their marriage imploded. Honestly, I thought they might finally realize how badly they screwed up by taking her side. But instead of apologizing, they came at me with excuses. The first call I got was from my mom. She didn't start with an apology or even a question about how I was doing. Instead, she jumped right into it. "Ryan, your brother is really struggling," she said, her voice all shaky. "This whole situation has been so hard on him. He's depressed. He needs his family right now." I almost laughed. "You mean the family that turned their backs on me? The one that let Julia lie about me without even asking for my side?" "Ryan," she said in that tone she always used when I was a kid, and she wanted me to feel guilty. "You know we didn't mean to hurt you. It was just complicated. But Ethan is your brother, and he needs you." I didn't let her finish. "Mom, I'm done being the scapegoat. If Ethan wants to talk to me, he knows where to find me. But I'm not playing this game where I swoop in and pretend everything's fine. That's not happening." She tried again, but I cut her off and hung up. I could feel my blood boiling, but I didn't regret standing my ground. A few days later, Ethan called me. "Ryan," he started, "I just want to say I'm sorry. I should have believed you. I should have seen through Julia. It was the first time I'd heard him admit he was wrong, and it caught me off guard. But I wasn't about to let him off the hook that easily." "I appreciate the apology, Ethan," I said, "but you didn't just believe her. You came to my home, accused me of something I didn't do, and got physical with me. That wasn't just Julia's fault. That was you." There was a long pause. "I know," he finally said. "I've been in therapy since everything happened. I'm trying to work through it. I miss my brother." I told him the truth. I miss the brother I grew up with too, But that guy isn't who you've been for a long time. You need to fix yourself before we can even think about fixing anything between us." He said he understood, but I could tell he wasn't happy. It was like he wanted me to just say, "All good, bro," and sweep everything under the rug. But that's not who I am anymore. Meanwhile, my parents were still trying to meddle. My dad called a week later, saying Ethan was considering selling the house because he couldn't afford to keep it after the divorce. "Maybe you could help him out," Dad suggested, "just until he gets back on his feet." "Are you serious?" I asked, trying not to lose it. "You want me to bail him out after everything? How about you sell something and help him?" Dad got defensive. "Ryan, he's your brother. Family helps family." "Funny how that only applies when it benefits Ethan," I shot back. "Where was that energy when I needed you to have my back? Don't call me about this again." I hung up before he could say anything else. Sarah was proud of me for standing my ground. "They're never going to change," she said. "The only thing you can control is how much you let them into your life." She was right. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was taking control instead of letting them dictate how things would go. As for Ethan, he kept trying to reach out. He'd send texts asking if we could grab a drink or meet up to talk. I told him I wasn't ready. Maybe someday, but not now. He needed to deal with his issues without dragging me into them. In the meantime, Sarah and I kept building the life we wanted. We bought our first house in Arizona, a small, cozy place with a big backyard for the dog we'd been talking about getting. We spent weekends exploring new hiking trails and trying out every mom-and-pop diner we could find. The best part? Sarah and I were finally starting to talk about starting a family. After everything we'd been through, the idea of bringing a kid into the world felt like a fresh chapter, a chance to create the kind of family I'd always wanted. My parents tried to guilt me about not visiting for the holidays, but I stood firm. "We're busy with work and the house," I told them. The truth was, I didn't want to be around their drama. I didn't owe them anything, not my time, not my forgiveness, and definitely not my attention. They made their choice when they took Julia's side, when they believed her lies without even asking for my side of the story. What they did wasn't just hurtful, it was something I'll never forget, and I'll never forgive. Ethan didn't just betray me, he turned on me in the worst way possible. My parents stood there and let it happen, all while treating me like I was some jealous troublemaker instead of their son. They threw me under the bus for someone who turned out to be a liar, a manipulator, and frankly, a disaster. And now they think they can just waltz back into my life like nothing happened? Not a chance. Family is supposed to have your back. They're supposed to stand by you when things get tough, not throw you to the wolves. My parents and Ethan showed me exactly where I stand with them, and I'm not going to pretend that didn't happen just because they suddenly want to play nice. I finally blocked their numbers and deleted their emails without opening them. I wasn't interested in hearing their excuses or their attempts to guilt me into reconnecting. They made their choice, and I'm making mine. Some people might say I'm being harsh or cold, but I don't see it that way. I see it as standing up for myself, because if I let them back into my life after everything they did, what's stopping them from doing it again? Nothing. And I'm not giving them that chance.